Hello, this is Kaya Blackman. I'm here to talk about growth mindset and literacy and the research that I did within my classroom. This is take two on the recording, so please bear with me. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go through this slideshow that I created, and I've got the table of contents. You can see I did the introduction, which the purpose, what I felt the problem was, what my hypothesis was, some literature, then the research I did, what methods I took, and then the results and potential future actions from this research. Okay, so one of the things I noticed and that I've experienced the last several years as a first grade teacher in San Diego Unified is that we are intensely and aggressively teaching students strategies for reading, and we're assessing them, almost even testing them on their reading levels. We have this sort of quantifiable assessment, the developmental reading assessment, which is one of many that teachers use to quantify reading levels. So basically what we're looking at is how students are reading words, how they're misreading or miscuing words. And we look at this by having students read a passage or a book for us, an at-level book, or a grade level appropriate book. And we sort of count up how they read the words on the page. And students are supposed to come into first grade reading at a level 4, 6, or 8. 4 would be considered one level, and a 6, 8 is considered another. And in order for students to be at a 4 or a 6, 8, they need to have a certain solid foundation of sight words, maybe 40 plus sight words that you would find on the Dolch or the Fry's 100 lists, and then some basic phonics skills, which they would have potentially learned in kindergarten, short vowel sounds, CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant words, so three-letter words like cat, hat, bat. And then some phonics exceptions, like the E at the end. Some people call it a bossy E or a sneaky E, but it essentially changes the short vowel to be a long vowel, as well as some ending skills like ing. Those are some pretty significant literacy skills that students would have had to have learned before coming into first grade. And then during the first grade year, we teach students to continue on that path, and we teach them things like vowel teams, vowel blends, consonant blends, digraphs, so that by the end of first grade, students have transitioned from learning to read to reading to learn. And within that process, they need to be at that DRA, that reading assessment level of a 14 or 16. And this level not only requires decoding skills, students are going to read for either meaning. So they're either going to figure out the word based on the meaning of the text, or they're going to figure out based on the literal decoding, the letters on the page. And also they need to look at comprehension as well as fluency in order to be at those levels. So part of the problem too is that students in first grade are looking at reading as though it's a different process than other activities in life, where, if they play soccer, they have to go practice and try to kick the ball and miss, and then try to kick and miss. And there's sort of a process that they go through to become better. And I have found that students don't always translate one process, like playing soccer and practicing soccer, to academic processes like reading. The other thing is that within first grade, we don't often teach the psychological or emotional facets of learning that would impact reading. So for example, when kids are learning how to walk, they don't have the cognitive awareness to say, I'm going to stand up and fall. Oh, I'm going to stand back up again. But by the time they're 6 and 7 and they're reading, they have that cognitive awareness. So what kind of psychological, emotional awareness or processes do we need to teach students in first grade to be able to make some of those connections? Okay, so the purpose of this study, after identifying the problems that I just talked about, was to look at the impact of growth mindset. This has been a hot topic for me anyway, as an educator for maybe the past 6 or 7 years. And growth mindset on student agency within literacy, specifically reading. I've been working on the concept of growth mindset throughout the classroom, but never targeted within a specific content area. And I specifically looked at that because of the pressures and the demands of reading. And so this particular study looks at one first grade class, so my class, and their reading levels before and after specific growth mindset strategies were explicitly taught as well as practiced. So the questions I was looking at were, how do first graders develop confidence in their mistakes and their learning? Is it okay to make mistakes? Why is it okay to make mistakes? Or what would happen if we make mistakes? Will teaching those students that mistakes and practice can help you grow, and then can also you translate some of that that growth within practicing soccer, for example, or walking, can you transfer that to things like reading or writing? So some of those questions are really led to the development for me of this study, along with, again, that pressure placed on these first grade students to be master readers and then college and career ready at a very young age. So the hypothesis that I came up with, again, going through the steps of identifying the problem and what I wanted to do, was that teaching growth mindset will increase student agency and reading strategies attempted during independent reading of new books. And essentially, I need to add this. Essentially, it will be measured by DRA scores. And so the null hypothesis would then be that not teaching growth mindset strategies and student agency will cause students to lapse in their reading development, or they will stay stagnant, and which will then create a further gap in achievement in their first grade reading. Okay, so for the first literature articles that I looked at, the first two are actually dissertations, and these are two documents that I found that really cover just the concept of growth mindset and the how to create interventions that will promote growth mindset among students. And the first one is Zach Krejcik. I apologize for the name, but she, Jenna, she was a student at the University of Kansas studying growth mindset and read aloud. So she specifically picked a literacy based area, and she wanted to look at character traits that you would find within read aloud. So finding a particular book like, Pigeon and the Mo Willems books, would studying Pigeon's character trait impact student growth mindset, for example. And so this particular study focused on that intervention as character traits to create a connection between motivation. And so in this particular study, though, interestingly, the findings did not support the connection between the read aloud character traits and growth mindset as an intervention for successful growth mindset. But it's interesting because it connects specific traits such as curiosity and persistence, which are two other themes that are going to come up throughout this study. So I thought that was interesting. I also really liked how there was a specific strategy of character traits within a read aloud, because that is also a first grade content standard. So I found that article to be particularly interesting. I also really like this particular article talks about components and review, going through concepts of growth mindset, how Carol Dweck, who is one of the major scholars studying growth mindset, and really, I would say, one of the foundational scholars of this work. However, her work is really based on, or really influenced by, Howard Gardner and his concepts of multiple intelligences. Again, this concept that intelligence is not necessarily a singular fixed item. And Howard Gardner also addresses that. And then the other theory of intelligence that Dweck is influenced by, and this article or this particular study discusses, is the triarchic theory of intelligence by Sternberg, and he argued that there were different aspects of intelligence. So we're looking at these ideas of intelligence, again, as not as a singular item, which I found to be interesting within Zach Krejcik's dissertation. The next one that I looked at, which I found to be interesting, was, again, another dissertation, but this one specifically talks about, can explicit teaching of growth mindset in early elementary increase student ability? Now, this particular article, this particular study I found to be interesting because it's the first one I found that dealt with early elementary. Most of the articles that I looked at dealt with middle or high school students and dealing with growth mindset and separating growth and fixed mindset. And at what point have students really formulated strong opinions about themselves as learners. So this one was going back, Peterson. This study looked at cognitive skill interventions that are effective for working on specific skill achievement. So this, again, looking at not a broad idea of interventions for students, but stopping with a specific skill, similar to the one we saw before in the previous article with read alouds, but this one talking about specific skill, but then expanding that and teaching students that the brain's ability can grow and constantly change with each new learning, but not just within a specific skill area, if that makes sense. So essentially, this one talks about how what the students believe about their brains and how they can grow and develop just as the rest of their body is not necessarily tied to one specific skill, but it can be to student ability across the board, and how this can also have profound effects on motivation, learning, and school achievement. So this is a really interesting idea because it takes the examples I gave before that, growth mindset towards playing soccer is one thing, and growth mindset towards walking is another. And then this one kind of expands it to growth mindset throughout your life within an academic setting. Okay, so the next two articles that I looked at, and I do reference there's a fifth article on the reference page. It's Dweck's work, and Dweck was the starting place because, like I said, I feel like she's the foundational scholar when it comes to growth mindset and fixed mindset work. Well, she defined those two terms and she really identified those, but I wanted to find others to use. So I found Megan Traps, and this is Hao, Peng, and Zhang. And both of these articles look at the concepts of resilience and motivation. And so the first one was specifically on Chinese primary and middle school students. Again, I like this one because it did affect primary or younger students. And this one really looks at the connections between growth mindset and school engagement and resilience. And the second one does the same. Except this one's talking about how teacher language and teacher feedback within writing, so within a literacy area, but how teacher language and feedback can specifically impact motivation and resilience. And so these two articles I found to be, these two studies I found to be really powerful connections for students' mindset as well as motivation. So even if a student doesn't per se like a book, how the attitude about themselves as a learner will have more of an impact on motivation. And I found that to be a really interesting connection, especially considering as I get later within this study explanation, you'll see that the enjoyment of reading is a question that I looked at. And these two studies really impacted why I asked that question. Okay, and some other thoughts about Traux's article, The Impact of Teacher Language. This specifically dealt with the concept of growth mindset feedback combined with objective compliments. So, for example, instead of saying, "Oh, wow, you finished that really quickly," you would change the feedback to be something like, "Wow, your focus on that task was whatever you want to be." So rather than being controlled like feedback, it would be a little bit more open, or you can always look at the word wall to solve that problem. So rather than being controlling and providing the solution, being more open with saying, "I like how you use strategy X to figure out this word," things like that. So the other thing this second article discussed was really the foundation that Dweck had set, which is that how students view themselves while participating in literary tasks has already been proven to really have an effect on their achievement. So this is a big connection for literacy tasks and students' self-awareness, which does impact resilience and motivation. So that's the end of part 1. This is how I'm trying to get around the 15-minute cap. So this is part 1, and I will upload part 2 in a few.